So, what if we've been looking at autism from the completely wrong direction? I mean, for decades, it's been defined almost purely as a psychiatric disorder, right? Something that just happens in the brain. But what if the brain is actually just the final stop on a much longer journey? In this explainer, we're going to challenge that old way of thinking and explore autism as a whole-body disorder. And this quote right here, this is the core idea. It flips the whole script. It says, hey, instead of starting with the brain, let's start with the body's basic chemistry. The psychological symptoms that we see, the behaviors, they're actually the end result, not the starting point.
And this visual, this perfectly illustrates what we mean when we say the brain is downstream. Just look at the flow here. You start with genetics and environmental stuff, right? But look what happens next. They create these biochemical imbalances all over the body. We're talking the gut, the immune system, you name it. Then, and only then, all of that flows downstream, finally showing up as a neurological disorder in the brain.
So here's our game plan. We're going to start by really hammering home this downstream idea. Then we're going to travel upstream together to check out 4 major sources of that biochemical imbalance. We'll look at the gut's wild opiate effect, unbalanced brain chemistry, a master switch called methylation, and finally, the heavy impact of toxins and inflammation. Then we'll bring it all back together.
Okay, let's dive in. When we say the brain is downstream, we are making a huge shift. We're moving from a purely psychiatric model to a physiological one. We're basically asking, what is happening in the body's river before the water ever even reaches the brain?
Our first stop upstream is the gut. And listen, this isn't just about digestion. We're talking about an incredibly powerful gut-brain connection, where things happening in your digestive system can have a direct, almost drug-like effect on the brain.
All right, meet the key players, casomorphin and gliomorphin. Now, don't let the names throw you off. The idea is actually pretty simple. When the proteins from dairy and wheat don't get broken down all the way, usually because there aren't enough of the right enzymes, they form these little protein fragments that act a whole lot like opiates.
So how does this actually work? Let's walk through it. First, you get that incomplete digestion we just talked about. That creates these opiate peptides. Now, if the person also has what's often called a leaky gut, these little peptides can actually escape from the intestine into the bloodstream. And from there, they can travel all the way up, cross the blood-brain barrier, get inside the brain, and latch onto opiate receptors, disrupting brain function just like a drug would. And when that happens, the behaviors we see on the outside, well, they start to make a whole lot of sense. You see things like foggy thinking, a really high tolerance for pain, even intense cravings for the exact foods that are causing the problem in the first place. It can also look a lot like irritability and inattention, almost like a cycle of addiction and withdrawal.
Okay, our next stop takes us from the gut right into the brain's own chemistry lab. You see, the brain has to maintain this super delicate balance to work right. Specifically, a balance between, let's say, excitement and calm.
I want you to think of the brain's chemistry kind of like the pedals in a car. You've got glutamate, which is the accelerator. It gets brain cells firing, and it's super important for things like learning. Then you have GABA. That's your brake pedal. It's the calming force that keeps the whole system from redlining. You need both, working together, to drive smoothly.
Now, the problem for a lot of individuals with autism is that the system has way too much accelerator and not nearly enough brake. Because of issues with enzymes or not having enough key nutrients like vitamin B6, the body just can't make that switch from glutamate over to GABA. So you're left with all this excess glutamate, which basically acts as an excitotoxin, overstimulating brain cells to a dangerous degree.
And what happens when a brain is just floored with the accelerator all the time? Well, it can't rest. This chemical imbalance leads straight to behaviors we recognize, like hyperactivity, really severe anxiety, and major problems with sleep. It can also be the fuel for tics and those obsessive or repetitive behaviors that are so common. All right, now we're going to go even deeper upstream to a process that's kind of like the body's entire operating system. It's a process called methylation, and it acts like a master switch that controls hundreds of other absolutely critical functions.
Now, just take a second and look at that number. Over 95%. This isn't some minor issue affecting a few people. This is a near universal biochemical marker. It's pointing to a massive breakdown in one of the body's most fundamental processes.
So what exactly is methylation? Well, it's a really simple chemical reaction, but its impact is just enormous. It literally turns our genes on and off. It helps our neurons fire together in sync.
And it's absolutely essential for building the neurotransmitters we need to regulate our mood, our attention, our sleep, things like dopamine and serotonin.
So you can imagine when this master switch is broken, the downstream effects are huge. For instance, if methylation isn't working right, a key dopamine receptor can malfunction, which leads directly to attention deficits and learning problems. It also means you get low levels of serotonin, which can trigger depression, anxiety, aggression, and all sorts of sleep disorders.
Okay, for our last stop on this journey, let's look at what happens when the body's own defense systems, its detoxification systems, are compromised. This leaves the brain wide open and vulnerable to attack, from both the outside and the inside.
A really key detoxification pathway is called sulfation. The easiest way to think about it is like the body's garbage collection system. It packages up all the trash and ships it out. Well, in many people with autism, this system is weak. That means toxins from food additives, heavy metals, even from yeast in the gut. They just don't get taken out. They build up. And this table does a great job of showing how different detox failures lead to different problems. See, if the enzyme for handling phenols from food is low, you might see hyperactivity and aggression. If the body can't get rid of heavy metals, that can mess with cognition. And if you've got yeast overgrowth pumping out its own toxins, that can lead to that kind of spacey, almost drunken behavior.
So you have this toxic overload, which when you combine it with something like a leaky gut, creates chronic inflammation all through the body. And this isn't just a physical thing. The body sends these inflammatory smoke signals straight to the brain, which then triggers neuroinflammation. That's inflammation of the brain itself, and that can do real damage to neurons.
And this neuroinflammation is often linked to some of the most difficult and painful behaviors we see, things like self-injury, headbanging, or eye poking. You have to wonder if these are desperate responses to some kind of intense internal pain or pressure happening inside the brain.
So, we've traveled all the way up the river, haven't we? From the gut to neurotransmitters to methylation and the detox system. Now let's head back to where we started and tie all of this back to the brain.
So if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's this. The behaviors that we label as autism are very often not the disorder itself. They are the final, visible signs of this whole cascade of interconnected biochemical problems happening all over the body. The gut, the immune system, our metabolic pathways, they are all part of the story.
And that realization, it just reframes everything. It pushes us away from asking, what's wrong with the brain? And toward a much bigger, more profound question. If all these systems are feeding into the brain, if the brain is truly downstream, then what does it really mean to treat the whole river?